The kind where you hold a physical report in your hands that represents months of your life, countless late nights, and millions of dollars in value for your company. You slide that report across a polished table, expecting acknowledgement, maybe even a quiet thank you. Instead, you get a condescending smile and a new, official title: Junior Staff. That single sheet of paper and that one dismissive label started a chain reaction that cost my company its $200 million client. My story isn't about revenge. It's about what happens when a system forgets who holds the real power. So if you're watching this right now, maybe in your car, maybe on your lunch break, just tell me one thing. Where are you listening from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I want to know how far this story travels. And if something in you recognizes something in this, stay with me. My name is Sarah Evans, and for 7 years, my career was built on understanding a particular kind of silence in a corporate office, the kind that speaks louder than any announcement. It is the silence of assumed value, the quiet hum of a system running smoothly because someone, somewhere, is diligently polishing the gears without ever being asked. I was that someone. At a major American technology firm, a place that rewarded the loudest voices, I was the quiet one, the senior account manager who ensured our most vital partnership. Our $200 million relationship with Omnicorp never just survived but thrived. My work was a series of quiet interventions. I was a translator between their needs and our capabilities, a strategist who saw risks months before they became problems, and a diplomat who soothed tensions before they escalated into conflicts. I knew the operational intricacies of Omnicorp better than most of their own mid-level managers. I understood that their head of operations, David, a sharp, fiercely intelligent man, valued proactive solutions over apologies. Our relationship was the bedrock of the entire partnership, built on a foundation of trust I had painstakingly laid, one solved problem at a time. I remember one particular instance, a Tuesday night that smelled of impending disaster. A critical third-party software update had failed, crippling Omnicorp's entire West Coast fulfillment network. The financial penalties for the downtime were accumulating by the hour. While my own company's executives were caught in a whirlwind of finger-pointing and scheduling emergency meetings to discuss forming a committee, I was on the phone. For 3 hours, I sat in my quiet apartment, walking David and his lead engineer through a complex manual override process, a contingency I had theorized years ago but had never needed to implement. I was not a coder, but I understood the logic of their workflow, the fragile dependencies they took for granted. By dawn, 90% of their operations were restored. The crisis was over. The following morning, an email from David landed in my manager Brad's inbox. Its contents were simple and direct. He wrote that he did not know what I was being paid, but it was not enough. He stated clearly that I had not just saved the account the previous night, he had saved their business from a multi-million-dollar catastrophe. Brad had forwarded the email to me, having added only a single, dismissive word to the top of it. Nice. There was no mention of a bonus. No official commendation. 2 weeks later, at the quarterly all-hands meeting, Brad stood before the entire division and presented a slide titled Proactive System Stabilization, outlining a textbook case of his team's foresight and crisis management. He never mentioned my name. I sat in the audience and said nothing. I let the silence swallow my contribution, believing, with a naivete I now find astonishing, that the work would eventually speak for itself. The beginning of the end did not begin with a bang, but with the quiet click of a mouse opening a document. It was an email from Human Resources announcing a company-wide organizational streamlining initiative. Attached was a spreadsheet detailing the new, standardized roles and titles. It was the kind of corporate exercise that produced a lot of noise but signified very little, or so I thought. I scrolled down through the departmental tabs until I found Premier Accounts. My eyes scanned the rows for my name. There it was, Sarah Evans, right next to the Omnicorp project. And in the stark, unchangeable column labeled Title were 2 words that felt like a deliberate, calculated insult: Junior Staff. It was an absurdity, a bureaucratic fiction. A junior staff member would not be trusted to manage the catering for an Omnicorp meeting, let alone be the sole strategic lead on a partnership of that magnitude. It had to be a typo, an error made by someone in an anonymous department who saw names on a list but understood nothing of the value they represented. Operating under this assumption, I did what I had always done. I chose the path of quiet professionalism. I composed a brief, dispassionate email, addressing it to both Brad and the head of human resources, a woman named Denise. I attached the document, highlighted the line in question, and wrote a simple, clear message. I asked if they could please clarify the discrepancy, as I believed my title was not accurately reflected in relation to my responsibilities. I did not complain. I did not threaten. I simply requested a correction to the record. The response was not a corrected document. It was a meeting invitation for 10 o'clock the next morning. The subject line read, simply, "Your career path." The conference room felt like a stage. Its glass walls put us on display for the rest of the office, a silent piece of corporate theater. I walked in carrying a leather portfolio. Inside were 14 pages of evidence, a quiet testament to my work. It contained the data on the 300% revenue growth of the Omnicorp account under my leadership, copies of the glowing annual reviews signed by David himself, and detailed summaries of 3 critical incidents where my direct intervention had prevented contract-terminating failures. I was not there as a supplicant. I was there as an expert, presenting a case for reality over fiction. Denise, the head of human resources, was already seated at the head of the polished mahogany table. She was the embodiment of corporate indifference, clad in an expensive but forgettable blazer, her face set in a pleasant, neutral expression that revealed nothing and conceded everything. Brad sat to her left, avoiding my eyes, his entire posture radiating a nervous energy. He was a man bracing for an impact he had helped to create. I began by laying out the facts, my voice even and measured. I spoke of the history of the partnership, the deep integration of our teams, the immense trust that underpinned the revenue stream. I concluded my presentation by sliding the most recent client satisfaction report across the table towards Denise. I told her that, as she could see, Omnicorp's own assessment of my performance and strategic importance did not seem to align with the designation of junior staff. Denise let my statement hang in the air for a calculated moment. She did not look at the report. Instead, she pushed it back towards me with the tip of a single, perfectly manicured finger. She leaned forward, a condescending smile playing on her lips. She addressed me as sweetheart, the word a tiny, sharp tool designed to diminish me. She said that my enthusiasm was appreciated, that it was a great quality in our junior employees. She then explained, as if to a child, that this was a corporate office, not a marketplace for negotiation. The title, she continued, was part of a company-wide standardization initiative to streamline our human capital assets. Her voice was smooth and practiced, as she said the company did not negotiate titles with junior staff. Every word was a carefully polished stone, designed to build a wall between my contribution and its value. I looked to Brad, the man I had supported, whose projects I had saved, whose reputation I had protected. I waited for him to intervene, to offer a correction, to be a manager. He cleared his throat, his eyes fixed on a point on the wall just beyond my shoulder, and said that Denise was right, that we all needed to align with the new corporate structure for the good of the business. His agreement was the final, quiet betrayal. It was not the passionate anger of an enemy, but the cold, silent consent of a supposed ally. In that moment, the last vestiges of my loyalty to the company evaporated. I understood that my competence was not an asset to be cherished, but a resource to be exploited. My quiet, consistent performance did not inspire respect. It bred complacency. They did not see me. They saw a function, an endlessly reliable cog in their machine. The anger I expected to feel never came. It was replaced by a profound, icy calm. I slowly, deliberately, gathered my papers and slid them back into my portfolio. I stood up, my movements measured. I looked at Denise, then my gaze shifted to Brad, holding his eyes for a single, long moment until he finally looked away. I thanked them for their time. I told them they had made my position perfectly clear. I turned and walked out of the conference room. I did not turn right, back towards the sea of cubicles. I turned left, towards the elevators. I rode down to the basement, to the Secure Records archive, a place I had not visited in years. The air was cold and still. Using my access card, I entered the windowless room. I was not there as a thief in the night. I was there as an archivist of my own career. I located the Omnicorp Master Services Agreement, a thick binder representing nearly a decade of partnership. I knew its contents intimately. I flipped through the heavy pages of legal text, past the service-level agreements and the liability waivers, until I reached page 14, Section 3. There it was. The Key Person Clause. A single paragraph David had insisted on during a contentious renegotiation, a clause specifically designed to protect his company from the arbitrary whims of corporate restructuring. It named me, Sarah Evans, as the essential liaison for the contract. It stated, in unambiguous terms, that my removal or reassignment without a 90-day written consent from Omnicorp constituted a material breach of the entire $200 million agreement. I made a single copy. Just one page. I folded it neatly, tucked it deep into my coat pocket, and returned the binder to its shelf. I left the archive as quietly as I had entered. Back at my desk, the familiar sounds of the office seemed distant, muffled. I sat down, the leather of my chair cool against my back. I opened my email client, my fingers moving with a sense of purpose. I wrote my resignation. It was 2 sentences, a formal notification of my immediate departure. I addressed it to Brad and Denise and clicked send. The system's response was swift and brutal. Less than 60 seconds later, a pop-up window filled my screen, informing me that my network access had been revoked. My email, my calendar, my entire digital existence within the company raced with a single click. A moment later, 2 figures materialized beside my cubicle. One was a man from the information technology department, his expression impassive as he held an empty cardboard box. The other was a uniformed security guard, his presence a silent, unnecessary show of force. The public ritual of my excommunication had begun. The low hum of the office died down as people noticed. I could feel the weight of their stolen glances. The IT man began unplugging my equipment, his movements efficient and impersonal. My keyboard, my monitor, my docking station all were placed into the box like evidence from a crime scene. He even picked up my personal mug, the one with a faded picture of a mountain on it, and dropped it in with a dull thud. Throughout this slow, methodical humiliation, Brad walked past my desk. He was on his way to the kitchen, laughing about something with another director. He did not look at me. His eyes slid right past me, as if I were a ghost. He clapped the other director on the shoulder, his voice deliberately loud, making sure I could hear him say they had to ensure the Omnicorp transition was seamless, with no disruptions. It was a final, parting shot, a declaration that I was, and always had been, inconsequential. They took the company's assets. They took the plastic card with my own smiling face on it. They believed they were purging a problem, erasing a discontented employee. They could not imagine that the real asset, the years of cultivated trust, the encyclopedic knowledge of the client's needs, and the power of a single, forgotten clause printed on a folded piece of paper in my pocket was walking out the door with me. That night my apartment felt like a sanctuary. There was no rage, no tears. There was only the strange, liberating feeling of a great weight being lifted. I was methodically sorting through my personal files, archiving 7 years of professional life, when a notification appeared on my laptop. It was a personal email from Maria, a sharp, kind analyst from my old team. The subject line was simply my name, followed by a question mark. I opened it. Her message was cautious, written with the care of someone navigating a political minefield. She said she did not know the details of what had happened, and that it was none of her business, but she felt I had a right to know what was being said. She wrote that the official story being circulated was that I had left for vague personal reasons. Then she added a warning. She told me to be careful. Attached to her email was a forwarded internal chain. The first message was from Brad, announcing my departure and my replacement, a junior salesman whose primary qualification appeared to be his father's position on the board of directors. The second attachment was what truly stopped my breath. It was a Microsoft Word document titled, innocuously, Omnicorp Transition, Talking Points. I clicked it open. It was a script, a pre-written, approved collection of lies for my replacement to use. It was a guide on how to manage the narrative of my disappearance. I scrolled through the bullet points, a sickening blend of corporate jargon and calculated deception, and then I found the paragraph that laid their intentions bare. It provided a script for what to say in the event of specific inquiries about my role. The official narrative, it instructed, was that I had been reassigned to a new, internal-facing role following a series of performance-related issues. The script concluded with a line meant to be reassuring: the Omnicorp account is now in more senior and capable hands. Performance-related issues. The words were a quiet, vicious act of sabotage. They were not content to simply erase me. They were determined to rewrite my history, to poison the very ground I had spent 7 years cultivating. It was a lie born of cowardice and arrogance, a lie they thought would never be discovered. As I sat there, the screen glowing in the dark room, the full scope of their betrayal finally sinking in, my personal phone began to ring. The screen lit up with the name that had defined my professional life: Omnicorp. I let it ring 3 times, each chime a beat in the rhythm of my new reality. I took a breath, pushed down the cold knot of anger, and let a cold, hard resolve take its place. I answered, my voice a mask of calm professionalism. I said my name. The voice on the other end was David's, and it was stripped of all pleasantries. He said he had just concluded a deeply unsatisfying 5-minute call with my replacement. He told me he had asked a basic, top-level question about the upcoming Phase 3 data migration, and the young man had told him he would need to circle back with the appropriate stakeholders. David's voice was like ice, as he said he did not pay $200 million a year for someone to circle back. He paid for answers. Then he delivered the payload. He told me the replacement had explained my absence by citing performance issues. David paused, then continued, saying he had known me for 7 years, that he had seen me work miracles at 3 in the morning, and that the story did not fly. He asked what was really happening. This was the moment of truth. The carefully constructed lie had collided with the hard reality of a long-standing professional relationship. I knew David had been growing weary of their bureaucracy for months. My situation, I suspected, was not a cause but a catalyst. I could have unleashed the full story, the insult, the humiliation. Instead, I chose a different path. I would not give them the satisfaction of an emotional outburst. I would give them only the cold, hard facts. I told David that I had submitted my resignation yesterday morning. A heavy silence stretched across the line, a silence so profound I could hear the faint hum of my laptop's fan. I could visualize David on the other end, a man who processed information with ruthless efficiency, putting the pieces together. He finally said he saw, and that it presented him with a significant problem. He explained that the Phase 3 migration was not just a project, it was business critical. He said my replacement had openly admitted he had zero familiarity with the architecture. He reminded me that I had designed it, that I was the only person on either side of the contract who understood its intricate complexities. His voice was grim, as he concluded that my former company had just placed his entire operation at severe risk. He had just armed me. The insult from Denise was a matter of pride. The lie about my performance was an attack on my reputation. But the risk to his business, that was an actionable threat. That was leverage. I let another moment of silence pass, allowing the weight of his problem to become his own. I replied calmly, my voice clear and certain. I told him that what he was describing was a matter of contractual obligation, not just a personnel change. For that reason, I said, he should not be talking to me. He should be talking to his legal team. I suggested he direct their attention to the Master Service Agreement, specifically to page 14, Section 3. For 2 days, there was nothing, a profound and total silence. It was not a tense silence, but a peaceful one. I had set a finely calibrated machine in motion and knew I simply had to wait. On Wednesday morning, an invitation appeared in my personal email. It was for a conference call. The attendees were David, 2 senior lawyers from Omnicorp's in-house counsel, and myself. My role was listed as independent subject matter expert. I accepted without hesitation. I sat at my kitchen table, a headset on, a cup of black coffee steaming beside me. The lead counsel, a woman whose voice was as sharp and precise as a surgeon's scalpel, began the call without any preamble. She thanked me for making myself available. She stated that they had reviewed the master service agreement, specifically the section I had indicated. Their interpretation, she said, was unequivocal. I was named as the key person on the account. My departure, for any reason, without a 90-day written consent from Omnicorp, constituted a material breach of contract by your former employer. She asked if that was my understanding as well. I confirmed that it was. The second lawyer then spoke. He said that for their records, my former employer had been vague about the circumstances of my departure, alluding to performance issues. He then asked, his voice laced with a fine, dry sarcasm, if those performance issues had any relation to the quarterly report where I had identified a billing error that had saved Omnicorp nearly $2 million. It was a beautifully crafted question, designed to expose the absurdity of their position. I did not take the bait. I kept my voice perfectly level. I replied that they would have to ask my former employer for their definition of performance. Another long, heavy pause settled over the call. Finally, David's voice cut through the silence, and it held the weight of a final judgment. He said they had all the information they needed. He thanked me for my time and told me to stay available. He added that their finance team would be in touch to discuss the logistics of setting up my new consultancy, assuring me that they move quickly. He would be handling all further communication with my former company from that point on. The storm I had been waiting for broke that same afternoon. My personal phone rang, and the caller ID showed Brad's name. His voice, when I answered, was unrecognizable. The smug, confident tone was gone, replaced by a thin, reedy panic. His voice, thin with panic, demanded to know what I had done. He stammered that Omnicorp's legal team had sent them a formal notice of material breach, that they were threatening to terminate the contract and were discussing financial penalties. He begged me to call them back, to tell them it was all a misunderstanding. I remained silent, letting him talk. I listened as he backpedaled, as his panic morphed into a desperate, clumsy attempt at negotiation. He said whatever had happened was a mistake. A clerical error from human resources. He said Denise had misspoken. He said they valued me. That of course they valued me. He told me to come back. He said they would fix it. He offered me any title I wanted, Senior Director, Vice President of Strategic Accounts, anything. He just needed me to call David and make the problem go away. His pleading was a confession. It was an admission that my value had never been in question. It had simply been ignored until my absence created a crisis. He was not apologizing for the insult. He was terrified of the invoice. I let his frantic, self-serving monologue exhaust itself. When all that remained was the sound of his own ragged breathing, I finally spoke. I told him I was afraid I could not discuss my employment with him. He sounded utterly bewildered. His voice cracked as he asked why not. My reply was quiet, but it carried the force of a tectonic shift. I explained that for any future professional opportunities, he would need to speak with my new business partner. I could hear the confusion in his silence before he whispered the question, asking who my new partner was. I let the silence stretch one last time, a vast, empty space that I had created. Then I delivered the two words that sealed his fate. Omnicorp. The silence on the other end of the line after I spoke those two words was more profound than any shouting could ever be. It was a vacuum, a void where Brad's entire world of smug certainty used to be. I could hear the faint, distant sound of his own office, a place that no longer had anything to do with me. He did not say goodbye. He did not argue or plead further. The connection simply ended, leaving me in the quiet of my apartment, the architect of a collapse I had never intended to build. My life, in the days that followed, moved with a surprising and efficient speed. My new partnership with Omnicorp was not a vague promise. It was a series of decisive actions. Their legal team drafted the incorporation documents for my new consultancy, which we named simply Evans Strategic Consulting. Their finance department set up the initial funding, treating it not as a risk but as a necessary investment to secure their own operational stability. I was no longer an employee fighting for recognition. I was a strategic asset being deployed. The climax of the severance came not with a phone call but with an email. It arrived on a Friday afternoon, forwarded to my new address from David's office. The subject line was coldly formal, a reference to the contract number and a notice of termination. Attached was a scanned copy of the official letter they had sent to my former employer. It was a masterpiece of corporate destruction, written in the precise, unforgiving language of contract law. It methodically detailed the breach of the key person clause, the misrepresentation of my employment status, and the immediate and unacceptable risk this posed to Omnicorp's business. The letter concluded with a single, brutal paragraph that officially severed their 7-year relationship, effective immediately. There was no room for negotiation, no possibility of appeal. It was an ending, absolute, and final. But it was the very last line of the document that made me take a sharp, involuntary breath. On the final page, effective immediately, Omnicorp named their new exclusive service provider for the $200 million account. It was a company with only one employee. It was my company. Weeks bled into one another, and the shockwaves from that decision began to ripple back to me through the quiet channels of the industry. The news of a major tech firm losing its flagship client was not something that could be kept secret for long. I heard it first from Maria, my former colleague, in another discreet email. She told me the atmosphere in the office was funereal. There had been a swift and silent internal investigation. Her email confirmed what I had already suspected. Brad, my former manager, had been let go. So had Denise, the head of human resources. They were not given public farewells. They simply vanished from the corporate directory, their profiles deleted as cleanly and impersonally as mine had been. The news of their dismissals did not bring me a sense of victory. Instead, it brought a quiet melancholy for a system so broken it had to devour its own architects to survive. They were not fired for their arrogance or their cruelty, but for their incompetence. They had failed in their primary duty to the company, to retain a critical asset. It was a business decision, just as my departure had been, just as Omnicorp's had been. It was the logical end to a chain of flawed, self-serving choices. The final message I ever received from anyone at that company arrived a month later. It was an email from Denise's personal account. It held only a single word, a question born of complete and utter disbelief. How? It was not a question seeking an explanation. It was a cry from someone whose carefully constructed world had been dismantled, someone who still, after everything, could not comprehend the forces she had set in motion. She did not understand that she had not been defeated by a person, but by a principle. That value, when ignored, does not simply disappear, it relocates. I stared at the word for a long moment, then I moved my cursor over to the icon and archived it, sending her question into a digital void where it could remain, unanswered, forever. My new beginning was not a triumphant parade, it was a quiet assumption of responsibility. My first official meeting as the head of Evans Strategic Consulting took place in Omnicorp's main boardroom, the same room where I had once sat in a junior capacity, taking notes. This time, I sat at the head of the table, with David to my right and his senior leadership team listening intently. We were not there to celebrate a victory or to rehash the past. We were there to work. My presentation was on the Phase 3 data migration, the very project that had been the ticking time bomb in my final days at the old firm. I laid out the architecture I had designed, the vulnerabilities I knew existed, and the streamlined, secure pathway I had created to execute the transition. The team asked sharp, intelligent questions. They challenged my assumptions. It was a rigorous, professional dialogue, a collaboration built on mutual respect. There was no condescension, no corporate politics, only a shared goal of achieving the best possible outcome. While conducting a deep diagnostic of the old system, a system I was now being paid to dismantle and replace, I came across a block of legacy code deep within the client interface. It was inefficient, sloppy, and riddled with security shortcuts. It had been the source of recurring minor issues for years, a persistent headache that was always patched over but never truly fixed. The digital signature on the code, the timestamp of its creation, belonged to Brad. It was a small, forgotten monument to his particular brand of managerial mediocrity. I highlighted the entire block of flawed code, its hundreds of lines of inefficiency and risk, and with a single, satisfying keystroke, I deleted it forever. It was not an act of anger. It was an act of correction. I never set out to dismantle a company. That is the part they will never understand. In the stories they tell themselves, in the quiet, bitter corners of their own narratives, I will forever be the villain, the one who plotted a vengeful coup. They will believe I joined a competitor, or in this case, created one, just to humiliate them. They will see every success I have as a strike against them, every achievement as a piece of armor forged in the fires of resentment. But the truth is far simpler and far colder. I did not want revenge. I just wanted to be seen. Not to be praised or put on a pedestal, but to be acknowledged for the work, the effort, the results. I wanted the reality of my contribution to be reflected in the reality of my position. And when they refused to look, when they chose to label me as something small and insignificant to serve their own fragile egos, I found someone who would. That was the only catalyst, not rage, not resentment. Recognition. Everything that followed the audit of the contract, the victory of logic, the panicked phone calls, the emails they now wish they had never sent, that was not my goal. It was just gravity. It was the quiet, inevitable collapse of a structure built on a foundation of arrogance, a system that had become so enamored with its own power that it had forgotten the source of its strength. They called me junior staff, as if a title could alter the truth, as if a label on a spreadsheet could shrink the value of a person. What they failed to account for is that some people do not need external validation to build their power. They just need a space to work, and the moment I was given that space, I did not use it to look back. I used it to build. The systems I design now are cleaner. The teams I lead are more efficient. The partnerships I build are based on transparency, not tolerance. I no longer walk into a room hoping to prove a point. I walk in because it is my job, my responsibility, my table. And if the ones who once called me invisible happen to be standing at the door, asking to be let in, I will not raise my voice. I will simply raise the bar. I did not destroy them. I outgrew them. And in the end, they were the ones who handed me the blueprint to do it. This story is a reminder that true power isn't about having the loudest voice in the room. It's about knowing your own value so completely that you can let the work speak for itself, understanding that quiet competence is your greatest leverage. If you have ever been overlooked, underestimated, or have quietly walked away from a place that no longer deserved your talent, know that you are not alone. Your worth is not defined by a title on a spreadsheet. If this spoke to you, like, comment, and share it with someone who's still finding their own voice.